What's up, guys? Today we are going over the role of ADV OU's most plus-size Pokemon, Snorlax, whose HP stat is as impressive as his speed is abysmal. What do his stats, typing, and move pool do for him? How does he realistically function within the metagame? What does he beat? What stops him? Etc. Let's find out. The first thing we shall learn about Snorlax within the third generation of Overused is that it shall always use immunity as its ability. The reason why is that there are several Pokemon that Snorlax should deal with, and part of being able to deal with them so easily hinges on its ability to not be affected by Toxic. These Pokemon, well, it's mainly Blissey, but it can also include Porygon 2, Skarmory, Zapdos, Jirachi, and any water type with Toxic, so like Milotic. And it threatens those in various forms. You know, Skarmory being the most dubious of those, but the others it mostly threatens. But by allowing them to toxic you, you give them a lane to play around you that does not have to be there. And you might be thinking, well, I see these two sets over here, Curse Rest and Self-Destruct. If I'm going Curse Rest, I just rest off the Toxic. If I'm going Self-Destruct, I'm just going to blow up anyway, so big deal. Let me tell you why that's nonsense. Curse Rest does not want to be forced into a premature rest, because that allows the opponent to play around you in win-win scenarios. For example, they can make riskier switches that aren't really that risky, because even if you predict that switch and don't rest, then you're still taking the toxic damage, and then you're going to get picked off anyway. Your rest being dictated by the opponent when it doesn't have to be is just nonsense. It makes it harder to beat Pokemon that you should just be dominating. As for the Self-Destruct, you're thinking, well, if I'm going to blow up anyway, what's the big deal? The answer to that is the same thing. By being forced into lower and lower health, you are being dictated to in when you can realistically. Excuse me, I'm blabbering. The window in which you have to self-destruct is not dictated by the attacks you'll take, but just by being on the field. Now that window shuts really, really fast, and that lets the opponent play around it a lot more easily. And the reward you get by foregoing immunity is basically nothing. I mean, ice and fire resistance, I mean, look at this thing's bulk. Without investment, that's incredible. Who cares about those moves? It doesn't have any special weaknesses, and it may as well resist most special attacks for how little they do. So use immunity. This is like a #1 advanced mistake. It's not really #1, but it's a big one. Like if you see someone using a thick fat Snorlax, you know that their picture of the tier is incomplete. So now let's move on to the sets. This is the classic Snorlax set, right out of GSC. The premise is simple: Curse to bolster weak defense, and strengthen attack so it can't be stalled out. Special defense is already handled. No special weaknesses. In theory, it seems pretty unkillable. Yes and no. We'll get to that. The sets, first of all, it always runs leftovers, but you probably already knew that. The moves. Body Slam, because stab is good. And the second move is up for debate. Shadow Ball is the standard because you cannot be completely walled by Gengar with 6 curses. But there are other ways of dealing with Gengar, such as Pursuit. So you go with Earthquake because Steel types and Tyranitar are just the worst. So those are the two main options. There are some fringe options as well. Now, this seems kind of ridiculous, but Hidden Power Steel hits an important trio of Pokemon. Tyranitar, a very common check. It hits Gengar, which isn't always enough, but it can be. It can be better than being completely helpless against it. Giving Gengar a super free switch is generally not something you want to do, and that is one of Snorlax's greatest weaknesses, but it can also be one of Snorlax's greatest strengths. We'll get into that later. Hidden Power Steel also hits Aerodactyl. Now, this is rather niche, so it doesn't really see a ton of use, but it does exist. Hidden Power Bug is the other one. Still hits T-Tar, hits Gengar for like 2 damage, but you know, it's something. But the main draw is that it hits Celebi, and Leech Seed Celebi is one of the most common Snorlax counters. So it is something worth considering. However, I would leave the hidden powers for the less experienced players. So don't bother with those. There's also the option of Sleep Talk, just to really limit the amount of turns the opponent has to shut Snorlax down offensively. Because if you're counting on it being helpless during those 2 turns to wail on it with Metagross before it gets too many curses, then you can be cut short by Body Slam hitting a Heracross that's trying to Focus Punch, or Curse giving it that extra defense boost it needs to live something. So that's an option too, but it super requires Pursuit support. So yeah, there are also some options that just go, well, I want to hit Gengar and I want to hit Tyranitar and Metagross and Jirachi, so who really needs Stab anyway? And they run this variant, which, in theory is pretty okay. Yes, this Snorlax set definitely specializes in taking down bulkier teams. It's not going to consistently be very good against more offensive squads with things like Metagross, Salamence, powerful Zapdos variants, Tyranitar, of course, Heracross, even Dugtrio finishing it off can be tough if it's caught on the right turn. So, and of course, opposing Snorlax with things like Focus Punch and Self-Destruct. We'll get to that. EVs, I gotta say, EVing Snorlax is something that even the best advanced players struggle with. There is really no right answer. Well, there are some answers that are more correct than others. The main one being don't invest in HP until you've invested in the defenses first. It's kind of like why Blissey always maxes its defense and usually doesn't bother with HP EVs. So on a curse set, you can go from Adamant to just hit things harder, be hard to stall out for things like the Steels and Celebi. And you could even run enough attack, which would allow you to OHKO Dugtrio, which I believe is around this number. Let's check it out. Dugtrio, Snorlax, Curselax. Yep, that's the one. 116 is a guarantee even on 4 defense Dugtrio, so there you go. If that's what you need, then that's your number. Then you, honestly, I can't tell you what the correct EVs are, but my recommendation would be figure out what you want to survive, what you want to take certain amounts of damage from, and play around in the calculator to find the optimal spread. Because sometimes you might just say, well, I want to take all the physical attacks, let me just cram this in there, but then you could do a little less and throw in a little here, and this HP would help with taking the special attacks too. So really play around with it. Some players like Careful because Zapdos does a ton of damage. As you will see here, this might not seem like a lot, 17% chance to 4 KO with leftovers, but you got to remember sand exists, and sand doesn't work in the calc, I'm sorry. But this gets uncomfortable really fast because remember how we talked about Toxic forcing a premature rest? Well, Zapdos is the primary special offensive Pokemon that forces premature rests with its attacks, which it can just throw out. So that's another thing we'll be going over later. But some people like Careful for that purpose, as well as things like Boosted Suicune, like Bold Suicune. I mean, even with Snorlax invested in attack and boosting its Body Slam, Bold Suicune is a real tank. So it can set up Calm Minds and just not take that much. And whoops, why did I do that? And so that can be messy, especially with potential Roar, so you're going to want to do as much damage as you can. Anyway, so some people like Careful. Number, couldn't tell you. But an underrated option, I believe, is Impish, because people are going to send in their Metagross to just wail on you. and after a curse, do this. But I think the option of this should not be thick fang, by the way. Yeah, I mean you're still getting chunked by this, but like look at that meteor mash. A lot of Metagross don't like to immediately explode because what if they hit the wrong target? So having that option is really, really nice. So, and then, as you accumulate more and more curses, then it gets slower and lower, and you see, it would probably have some more investment than this. But, yeah, so Impish is a good option. And, mix in some HP, mix in some, because some people subscribe to the idea that Curse Restlax doesn't really need attack, because you're supposed to get a million curses. Okay, so that's what Curse Rest Snorlax does. And we will get into some of its other intricacies later. Now we are going to the more offensive realm of Snorlax. And that is with Self-Destruct, the complete opposite of Rest. The 12 speed EVs here are because, I mean, you could feasibly have them here as well, but since you're going to be cursing a lot, then it's not always useful. The 12 speed EVs allow you to outspeed a paralyzed Aerodactyl, which can be crucial since you're throwing around Body Slam and all. So it's usually a worthy investment. And then some Lax like to creep each other, but Snorlax tends to be starved enough for EVs in my experience. I mean, I know that sounds crazy, but it's because you want your attacks to hit things hard, but you also want the bulk to do something. Because even though while Snorlax could feasibly function with no EVs at all, you don't want it to. Like, you want it to be able to shrug off those Zapdos Thunderbolts. But you also want its Focus Punch to dent Skarmory. Things of that nature. So I wouldn't get too crazy. I mean, a couple more is fine, but don't go like, with this many speed EVs, I'll never get outsped by other Snorlax. Don't fall into that trap. So we have a couple options here. The classic is, well, there are a lot of classics here, but let's start with the mixed Snorlax because you're going to want to use this on offensive team. The objective is to take hits and dish them out. Of course, dishing out hits doesn't do much good if you're easily walled. And the primary thing that easily walls Snorlax is Skarmory. So what do? You make it brave and you get rid of the speed EVs. And you throw on Fire Blast. Now, it doesn't do a ton, so you're going to want to put on some investment. It can be from this to, again, play around in the calc. No one's found the optimal Snorlax EVs for this, I don't think. And we'll get more into the functioning of Fire Blast later. You can also have Shadow Ball, because Fire Blast and Sand will bring down Gengar to less than max HP, which is often all you need for that DD Mens to sweep. But sometimes you want to hit it a little harder. Maybe you hit it on the switch before it Will-O-Wisps you. Then, of course, there's Earthquake, which is, of course, very viable with Tyranitar, Metagross, Jirachi. Those are big targets. Then you can use Focus Punch, because Tyranitar gets smoked by this, and Earthquake, you kind of need to hit it a couple times. Which can get messy, given Snorlax's potential longevity issues with this set, but Focus Punch is the attempt to make everything get smacked. And Focus Punch will also commonly run Shadow Ball, since Focus Punch is also for Skarmory, since it does not run Drill Peck that often, and if it does, it's not running Toxic, or it's not running Protect, or it's giving up something which makes it easier to either beat down repeatedly or switch into with Zapdos and things like that. So yeah, that's another variant. Another variant that you usually see on the mixed variant, or another move you usually see on the mixed variant, is Counter. With how many physical attacks this guy can take, it's potentially game-changing. I mean, obviously don't stay in on a CV Tar, because it could just Focus Punch you before you ever get that counter off. But something like a Metagross Meteor Mash, which usually, I mean, you're going to want to pump some defense EVs, because Meta versus uninvested Curselax is going to do a lot. And you ideally want to do a 2-for-1 where you counter the Metagross and then you blow up on something weak like Milotic or something sleeping, ideally, I guess. But yeah, you're going to want to pump those defense EVs, especially because you also like it when Dugtrio can't revenge you from really, really high health. As seen, the difference some EVs make, I mean, that's a ton, So, yeah, EVing Snorlax is a great mystery, and I wish you good luck in figuring it out. I'm pretty sure every ADV player uses different EVs on their Lax. Um, on their various Laxes, in fact, Laxin. Um, yeah, I can't remember a time where I've used the same EV spread on a Snorlax twice, even if it was the same set. And it's not even team dependent. It's just, well, let me try a different way to EV my Lax this time around. So yeah, I think that's covered most of the variants. Oh, what I didn't mention is Curse Self-Destruct. This is to stop yourself in order to block Skarmory. We'll get to the potential issues this might have, but this will pretty much take out anything you need, besides Gengar, which is why you're in Shadow Ball. Okay, those are Snorlax variants. Now let's get to their problems, because there are a lot. Snorlax is a potential beast, but it's also a potential huge, enormous liability. Why is it such a liability? Well, let's start with the Curse Rest set. What stops Curse Snorlax? The answer usually isn't Pokemon in and of itself, as much as the common battle conditions brought about by those Pokemon. I am, of course, referring to the Sandstorm brought on by Tyranitar and the spikes brought on by Skarmory. In addition to walling the standard Curse Lax set of this forever, and in Tyranitar's case, hitting it hard, then they also just make it hard for Snorlax to even switch in. And I mean, well, Snorlax is really bulky. If you've ever played GSC, you know how hard it is to take a Snorlax down, even with repeated hits. But suddenly, with sand in the picture and with multiple spikes, then I mean, Snorlax is going to roll over and crumble. It'll switch in once, maybe twice, and since it's not doing that much immediate damage, then it's not that much of a threat. The worst core for, I mean, most Snorlax to face is Tyranitar, Gengar, Skarmory. Very common stuff. So it can be a real problem to get around when they can just pretty much easily sit on it. And you're thinking, well, why don't I just, Earthquake for the T-Tar with Curse is not so bad if I can Magneton the Skarmory. And you're like, yeah, and then Gengar comes around. Now, of course, we can get around these issues. But they are not all Snorlax bases. However, for now, let's see how it can get around those. Magneton is pretty much always going to be seen with this. There's just no way around it. You cannot not kill Skarmory with this, so it's just out of the question to have anything else. I mean, you can try things like blowing it up with CB Metagross before it ever gets a chance to do anything. You can try things like Refresh Claydol to just permanently sit on it, but realistically, you are going to use Magneton with this. Because otherwise, every single time, I mean, the Metagross example is one thing, but it's not like Lax's issues end there. So, an option is Magneton, and then you can also run Dugtrio. We'll get to the full teams that Lax often finds itself on later, but for now, we'll say it is a prime beneficiary of the double trap strategy, as any of its checks, Tyranitar, Skarmory, Metagross, Jirachi, are prone to Magneton and Dugtrio. The trapping can even extend to Gengar, since that is weak to Pursuit. And suddenly, Snorlax is looking pretty scary, because turns out, yeah, its checks are really good, but once you remove those checks, you see how good Snorlax is against everything else. Celebi is another prime target for Dugtrio, because its Leech Seed set, as we've said, is a prime Snorlax check. So, but yeah, once you get past those, and I know that sounds ridiculous, and kind of because it is. Once you remove, 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 counters, then yeah, of course Snorlax is pretty good. But the fact of the matter is, it can be worth it just because of how good Snorlax is at 1v1ing things like Zap, Blissey, Suicune sometimes. But yeah, it can often feel like it's not going anywhere, but things like Milotic too. And but that's the idea of taking out Snorlax. This set requires a lot of trap support. Sometimes you even throw in a Claydol just because even with Skarmory dead, then that one spike it probably got before it died to Magneton can be, 12% is not nothing, guys. So it can be the push that the other guy needs to force your Lax to rest and deal with it that way. So Claydol sometimes comes along, and sometimes these teams will even go to the extreme of changing the weather because just Snorlax and sand, like the difference is colossal. So it sounds pretty extreme, and it is, but that's how good Snorlax is against the parts of the metagame that are not countering it. This makes it sound like Snorlax is just, kind of a wimpy, well, beat 80% of the other team and then I'm really good. I mean, and it is a valid complaint, but it is worth knowing about, just because of how lethal it can be. So, yeah, Tyranitar, Dugtrio, Skarmory, Magneton, sometimes Gengar too. Sounds like a lot, but it's a lot easier than you think because you bait in with Snorlax. You bait one of the targets in, and then you remove them. But it's also not quite as easy as that because a good player knows, hey, this guy's a Snorlax, good chance of Magneton. So it's about playing the game and figuring your opponent out, and they're trying to dance around your strategy while executing their own, aka Pokemon. So that's Curse Rest for you. I mean, it's got other problems like Metagross naturally just kind of annoys it, but we've already established that it's not going to do so well. This whole Curse Rest thing in the face of powerful offensive teams usually not going to fly. So you might even think, hey, well, I can boost on Swampert, but even Swampert, these days it runs offensive Focus Punch sets. And even before that, on some offensive teams, it ran a sub Endeavor set, which is just going to destroy Lax. So you got a offensive Suicune. I mean, look, Body Slam Para will be annoying, yeah, but Suicune blows through Lax if it comes in. If it Calm Minds on the Switch, so. And I mean, even this set, I mean, it gets walled by Jirachi, so offensive Jirachi, I mean, Celebi and Sand, again, Sand. Snorlax hates Sand, possibly more than anything else besides Suicune, who is, funnily enough, a very common partner on those track teams. So yeah, we've established this set is more about taking down the remainders of defensive teams than it is about taking on offense. But some special offense can struggle with it, especially like Calm Mind stuff with Porygon 2 and the ones with no T-Tar especially. But those are not as common as they once were. Not nearly as common. So Sand just really, really is a thorn in its side, and you have to account for it. Okay, so that's Curse, Rest, Snorlax, and its many issues, myriad issues even. But yes, if you face a defensive team with like Milotic and Magneton and Claydol, I mean, Snorlax kind of does well against the teams that it finds itself on. And by that I mean the trap teams that it finds itself on also kind of tend to be weak to other lacks because they lack the tools that usually ward Snorlax off. So, I mean, yeah, switching into Gengar and its Taunt Will-O-Wisp combo is just the worst. Sometimes it even explodes, and it can be really messy. So, this is not a slap on team and automatic win button. Not that those really exist in Advanced, but there are Pokemon that are definitely more easily wielded for results than this set. This set requires you to really be aware of the metagame and your opponent. So let's move on to Self-Destruct. So this set is a little more self-sufficient because the power of a stab Self-Destruct is so great that even if it takes that Gengar burn, it's at least going to chunk something. Like, let's, for example, use a standard max HP Tyranitar, and let's use the deck sets are not very accurate, by the way. Like this 3-attack rest thing, this is like a GSC set that. So yeah, like see this is already a ton. This is barely any investment. So now you make it burned, and that's still not unusable damage. That's putting it in Dugtrio range, for example. So, and sometimes you might have more investment. Let's just see max attack for the kicks. It's good. So last will rarely use max attack. It's just a preference of mine. But yeah, we'll put it around here as the minimum you should go to. So what is the role of this Snorlax? Well, this Snorlax is supposed to take hits, things from Zapdos and Suicune and offensive variants of these guys, and it's supposed to hit back. Very often you will see it taking a DD'd attack from Salamence and blowing it up. Not your traditional counter, but it's bulky enough to take hits from so much that its self-destruct becomes utility in and of itself because it's so strong. So that is its main use. It's not easy to switch into a Snorlax that is going more on the offensive. So let's take the Shadow Ball Focus Punch set, which is agreed upon by most to be the most effective. Because if you're running a Fire Blast mix Lax against um, Scarm Gengar T-Tar, then it's just a horrible feeling as Skarmory spikes in your face and protects because Fire Blast does nothing. Not to mention its horrible accuracy. Not horrible, but when you're doing so little, then and it's low PP, and then it can switch to T-Tar, and even if you have Earthquake, then it can go to Gengar, and it can Will-Wisp you, and you're just even more useless than before, and it is just horrible. So this kind of maximizes the power you're going to be dishing out. Shadow Ball makes Gengar think twice about switching in. Whereas with Fire Blast, it's like, oh, well, I have Gengar, so I can just switch right into it. Big deal. Focus Punch, I like a lot of attack because I really like to sting Skarmory, and I think that is generally advisable. A big benchmark for this is you're going to be wanting to be able to deal with offensive Suicune, whose Hydro Pump stings. Um, I'm not saying you have to go careful max, but you're going to want to like see this. It's not breaking 50. That's generally what you want. I mean, if you get to the calc and it's like 50.1 max or like 50.4, which is something I've gotten to just by playing around with the numbers in here for way too long, then that's going to be okay. Because realistically, Snorlax might not even be at full health, and you might just blow up immediately. That's really just so you can try to land a body slam paralysis on it before you commit to blowing up. Because if you can land the slam para, then you might not even lose your lax. That kind of thing. But yeah, you're generally going to. I mean, look at that. That's a burned self-destruct against something as bulky as max HP. Oh, that's 0 attack too. So yeah, the idea stands. Of course, the thing with this Snorlax is, well, it's definitely more intuitive to bring since you just start smacking everything in sight. Um, Something to note is that you really have to, with both your team and your playing, you have to make what it hits count. Because, I mean, what good is it, taking the burn to Shadow Ball Gengar if Snorlax doesn't do anything else, and then you don't even have something to capitalize on it. Like an example would be, hey, I took a burn to hit the Gengar, but that's crucial because now I know I'm going to sweep with DD Mance because it can't take my plus 23 flying anymore. And Snorlax still comes in on the water type and threatens even though it's burn. I mean, I have a limited window, but that's how the teams this Snorlax operates on, or is placed on. This is how they operate. They know they don't have all the time in the world. They've got to make their attacks. They got to hit hard, and they have to choose the right attacks. Now, what are the right attacks? That's for you to decide in each and every battle, which is unique. But generally, you don't want to just, I don't want to say passively body slam, but it is kind of passive when you're like, well, this guy seems to be running a defensive team. Let me just body slam as he goes to one of Skarm, T-Tar, or Gengar. And, you gotta say, okay, I'm gonna focus punch, and these are just examples. I'm gonna focus punch because Gengar is frail and it doesn't want to eat a stray Fire Blast if it can help it since it needs its health, and Skarmory is safe for at least a turn no matter what, and if I get T-Tar, that's great. Even if he does go Gengar, I can Shadow Ball after. And if I think he's just pivoting, I can even focus punch again if I'm feeling brave. These are the examples I'm talking about. You have to really be aggressive with this kind of guy. If you're facing a team that's not really doing that much damage, like some sort of Milotic balance, then yeah, you can just kind of spam body slam and be like, yeah, let's see what happens. It's not like they're threatening me. That's your comfort zone. But with Snorlax, you have to be aware of how badly it can be messed up. So the aim of this set is to not fall victim to that. So, Focus Punch, Shadow Ball, and you can also run Earthquake. Now, we're mostly talking non-Magneton teams here. However, if you have a Magneton, then smacking Skarmory down is no longer a concern, so you can run this more idealized set, since Earthquake is of course superior in dealing with Metagross and Jirachi, if you can help it, especially if you land a Beast Slam para. With the other set, the concern is more Skarmory, so you'll take a little less damage on Metagross and Jirachi because they are not as threatening as Skarmory threatens to be, with its spikes that choke your entire team. So that's the point. And push comes to shove against those guys. I mean, look, let's just throw in this standard Metagross there and take out the burn. That's not bad at all. That's a ton of damage. That's an Aerodactyl ready to go crazy. That's a T-Tar ready to go crazy. So, push comes to shove. Yeah, you can play around with like the Fire Blast counter stuff, but that's also the stuff that's most prone to getting played around. And the stuff that those guys, I mean, Fire Blast kind of just sucks, I mean, if Fortress is really a concern for your, pounding offense team, by the way, Fortress has to respect Fire Blast because unlike Skarmory, it gets smacked. So you have some leeway there. But Fire Blast just kind of doesn't do much else. It's a weak attempt at hitting Skarm. So and counter is admittedly amazing potentially. However, with the kind of again, Metagross can be dealt with if even with you have a lax. I mean, just a body slam para will do a ton, and if it's Lum, then it doesn't have lefties. So Skarmory is threat number one. Well, I should say that some teams like the Skarm without the sand is not that bad because, as you'll notice with Pokemon like Swampert, Metagross, and Jirachi, the ones with leftovers that are immune to sand, they're like, oh, spikes are annoying, but it'll be gone after a couple of turns. And when there's no sand, then Snorlax focus punching Skarmory down is kind of the same thing. So I was like, oh wow, this guy didn't even bring a T-Tar. This makes it so much easier. So that's the idea. And again, more attack. I mean, Skarm is annoying. So I think. So yeah, it's not the 3 KO, it's more about wailing on it and making sure that each hit is going to count. I mean, you can go higher, and this is pretty strong. So, I mean, breaking 40 is nice. So, uh, yeah. So, I think that's accurate. And so, I mean, you'll be able to. Another common function is switching into Mixed Mens, who most offensive teams hate. Coming into an HP grass aimed at Swampert, big. The defense EVs are also good for Swampert EQ because very often, it'll be trying to Ice Beam your Salamence or something, or like your non-HP grass Zapdos, and you'll want to come in, and then the Swampert guy might go, well, I kind of want this thing weakened for my own Zapdos, so he might hit you with an Earthquake, and the less damage he does, the better. I'm not saying go max, but do your calcs. And of course, be careful of Suicune. Or, be ready to boom immediately on it if push comes to shove. Maybe invest in a Zapdos. But we'll see that when we get to the kind of teams that this guy functions on. Um, yeah, I think that has covered most of the threats that the Snorlax faces and how it can work around them. Celebi is, I mean, less annoying because you can blow it up. Again, have something to abuse it. Maybe you got a Zapdos. Maybe you have a Suicune, as we'll see in those. Okay, so this is more than kind of like a why Snorlax can suck and how to make it suck less kind of thing. So I want to focus on the good things that Snorlax does. And there are plenty of them because, the title of this video, after all, is Why Snorlax is Good in ADVOU. Its only weakness is to fighting, and while there are focus punches to be found, and these guys that carry focus punch, or sorry, this guy mainly, and sometimes this guy, and like weaker stuff like Gengar, which doesn't really do that much, because it needs to invest too much, and Snorlax can invest a lot too. Anyway, these guys are going to be smacking it really hard anyway, but you'll notice that Snorlax doesn't really take that much damage from anything. I mean, sure, like Heracross, who can't switch in, I should add. And after a curse, it's a lot less threatening. I mean, even a CB Brick Break. I don't know why Sleep Talk is still there. But yeah, like, even a CB Brick Break. I mean, yeah, it can be worth it, but the +1, let's call it this, is doing a lot. So it's not a safe switch because Snorlax can just spam Body Slam. So that is the good in Snorlax. Not a lot. I mean, if you hit it really hard, you're going to be seriously invested. So most players will slow it down. That's where the Skarm Gengar thing comes in. It's not like Skarm and Gengar are OHKOing it. It's that they're slowing it down. That's what Celebi does. I mean, you think Celebi is sparing Snorlax's health anytime soon? No, it's making it into a liability. So the idea of those teams that try to remove everything from the game before Snorlax can be let loose. I mean, it's not only effective because Snorlax baits those things in the first place, but also because of Snorlax's innate, fantastic ability to just not take that much damage from things because it's not weak to that much. And the base powers and attacking stats usually don't go together. I mean, Tyranitar, Rock Slide sometimes, sure, but I mean it's strong, but it's not a world beater. I mean, CBTAR, against a prior lead damage. I mean, and this is not like an accurate spread at all, but for a choice banded attack from something this strong against a Curse-Lax, this isn't that much. And I know it's not the right spread, but it doesn't change that much. I mean, it's a lot, but you can have more. The threat comes more from Rock Slide, Flinch, and things of that nature. And of course, you're one of those guys who goes Impish, then things get really hairy. Sometimes it doesn't even break 30 after one. So, yeah. So Snorlax is a Pokemon that can be a huge liability, but it can also be a game winner like no other. So, its ability. I mean, this is more going for the slow burn win against the opponent, really preying on the fact that it kind of preys on the fact that some teams just can't hurt it, but it also has to deal with all the residual damage waves that adds up really, really fast. I mean, like Sandstorm, one spike down, switch into Zapdos Thunderbolt, and then all it's threatening me with are these two moves off of not very invested attack. I mean, I'm probably not that scared with just a standard game. So, um, but the thing is, if as soon as your big guys, which are prone to trapping, go down, then this becomes scary. The problem lies in more even Pokemon that it doesn't that's supposed to beat can be threatening by virtue of that passive damage. See mostly the Zapdos example. So this guy is where it really shines. I think most advanced players will agree that this guy is more of a playmaker, game changer, shot caller, all that kind of stuff. Because he's powerful. He doesn't focus on trying to wall and outlast everything as much as using his monstrous natural bulk to smack everything in sight and check things. I mean, with offense, you're not going to be able to perfectly counter things. So sometimes you stick the baddest blob you can find in front of the other guy and blow it up. I mean, Salamence is scary, but it's not going to be muscling through Snorlax after one Dragon Dance, or even two if Snorlax is healthy. So, I mean, you're not going to be countering Zapdos a million times. What matters more is that you get it in against Zapdos, and you make those turns that it is in count. So, I think that's pretty accurate, fairly comprehensive, and all that. I guess like a bulky team with Milotic, Claydol, Magneton, Snorlax is probably going to go crazy. So both variants. If their best counter to this is a leech seeding Celebi, or even better, their own Curse-Lax, then haha, that's very funny. And here you just kind of go crazy, just spamming attacks all the live long day because they can't really hurt you. So, okay, teams. Let's get to teams. We'll first go with Curse Rest. So, as mentioned earlier, this can be a lot of stuff. An example here would be Magneton, Claydol, and then, you pick your choice of bulky stuff. Celebi, because Leech and Baton Pass can bait in Skarmory. Tyranitar, because Crunch and Pursuit, and that means you don't need to use Dugtrio, because this thing can run Earthquake. And then you run Suicune, because it also enjoys no Skarmory and no spikes. So yeah, Calm Mind, Surf, and it's bulky, and this is just an example. These teams, I gotta say, I'm not the biggest fan of, and many players feel the same because in that whole going all in on the Snorlax sweep, you kind of forget certain offensive threats. I mean, look at how bad this is against um, Heracross. It is just absolutely shredded. And many permutations of this team are going to have similar problems. I mean, you can throw in your Doug Trio, you can throw in your Weather Change Zapdos, which would of course go with Shadow Ball X. Um, Things like this. I mean, it's something because her can win in revert in revenge, but you know something like a Salic Heracross is just destruction, utter destruction. So but if you're really aiming to hit those bulky teams where they live, then you know you trap them, you remove their spikes, you remove the sand, and you know then these two guys kind of go crazy. That's the idea anyway. You just got to be really careful about those. The more traditional team with this is, you know, you're going to accept the sand, you're going to accept the spike because these guys are just so powerful, and instead you get some extra offense. So you get Celebi potentially trapping Skarm before it even gets the spike down, doing the same thing to Tyranitar in case they want to switch in so they don't get Magnetoned. Um, and, you know, you do things like check other Snorlax nicely. Um, and then the classic team, or not leftovers, is Choice Band. And you know other stuff, other moves. You know, offense and some defense like Heracross and stuff like that. This can also be a Milotic because Dragon Dancers are scary, and so is other Suicune sometimes, and so is Mixed Salamence, and Metagross can be annoying because Suicune being forced to rest is kind of similar to Snorlax. That's why they fit so well together when the passive damage is being nullified somehow or being turned into offense of your own or being removed, and then they kind of thrive. But yeah, so it's pretty much Mag Trio, you know, Water type and Celebi, and then this. I mean, you can also throw in stuff like Metagross. It's so bulky and loves Skarmory. Um, or you can throw in Jirachi because, you know, Wish, Calm Mind is also really good. And, you know, extra healing is nice. I mean, Snorlax loves not having to rest, especially in sand. So, but I mean, you kind of get the picture. And I mean, you have to be careful because with this, for example, then Flygon with a spike down would just go crazy. So, like Salamence a lot. So, or Band, of course. Yeah, so that's pretty much this or the Magneton Claydol route, which looks has various permutations. Um, yeah, I think that's fair to say. Okay, so now Self-Destruct. This also goes a couple of ways. Snorlax is naturally a fit on Magneton offense because of all its wonderful qualities. Chucks waters, blows things up, generally hard to kill, hits hard. So, you know, it's good stuff. So we're going to go with the Earthquake set on this, you know, this all-out attacker. This needs max attack a little less because it's not trying to focus punch Skarmory down. It's not a concern. You got your mag for that. And it's got other synergy like blowing up a Celebi for Metagross. One of them would probably blow up, you know, Metagross might blow up a water, which would mean that the Salamence really good is really good with excuse me. The Salamence is really good with their Celebi remaining and water and Skarmory gone. And you know, or Snorlax might blow up on Celebi, which means that Celebi's not switching into Metagross. Or if Metagross blows up on Celebi, then now Snorlax handles the water. You see how these two are very common together on offensive teams. You got your Meteor Mash, your Explosion, and your other things. You can run Pursuit for Gengar. Because usually these teams are just kind of like, all right, well, if my Magneton isn't already Doug Trio'd, because Doug Trio is a big problem for these teams, then I'll just kind of throw it in there, and if it's got Fire Punch, then, you know, that kind of sucks. I'll deal with it some other way, like with Swampert or with Lum on Metagross, or, you know, Tyranitar or Heracross. Heracross doesn't really counter its fire better counter if it's Fire Punch. It's just the Fire Grass Wisp Gengar is really annoying here, but that's something else you gotta take into account. So yeah, but this is kind of what those teams look like. I mean, you can throw in your T-Tar, your Gyarados, your Aerodactyl, your whatever. Snorlax anchors these teams very nicely. And since in the spirit of not letting Dugtrio run all over you, you might run some more defense than usual. I'm putting in random numbers here, but you get the idea. You also might take care to be safe against Suicune. And, since you're here, you may as well throw in those 12 for Paralyzed Arrow, as unlikely as I found that scenario to be. So here's just an example. Don't use this without calculating things for yourself. Yeah, so I will leave that. This is pretty much just standard Magneton offense, and the Snorlax is going to be big here in warding off mixed Salamence because Salamence is scary for these. You're gonna want to come in on Fire Blast and HP Grass, and even in Sand that adds up. So make sure every hit counts. Yeah, and maybe invest in a Gyarados. That's also a decent idea. Yeah, Tyranitar is also helpful because it can take a Brick Break from high health, and you got these two massive Intimidators to draw attacks for it to come in on. So anyway, you get the idea. Snorlax is good on Magneton offense. Now, what about non-Magneton offense? Well, it's still really good. It's just that now you're going to really want to hit that Skarmory, because Skarmory, this could be banded, and you're just going to want to blow it up or just wail on it with repeated meteor matches. You got to be careful about those Scar Magneton teams where they get a spike and then trap your Metagross with Magneton, and it's just like, what's the point of life? So, but it's also an option to go mixed with like HP Fire and Lump for Gengar. This is that standard set. Rash or Quiet, depending on how you're going to play it. But yeah, this is often going to be mixed itself. Yeah, you got your T-Tar, which can be Dance, Mix, Band, whatever. Just got to keep up the offensive assault. Swampert for defensive backup, and it can run Hydro Pump itself. It can run a Salic Berry Endeavor set to keep up with offense and check and get fast if it needs to, but it can also run Quake and Focus Punch, which is very common these days. Just because you'll notice the theme, you gotta wail on Skarmory, and the end result can be Aerodactyl cleans up, sure, or it can just be Metagross Agilities eventually, and sweeps there. Also good because Dugtrio is a huge problem, or this can be a Dragon Dancer itself. Basically, as you can see, the options are pretty much endless for how you want to customize it. But Snorlax anchors these teams because the special attackers, they really are uncomfortable for the other guys to deal with, and Snorlax is huge in warding them off, while keeping up the offensive assault. So, yeah, Zapdos is nice because it gives them backup against water, so it's not just like if Suicune keeps getting in because the other guy's playing well, then it's not like, oh, well, Snorlax is going to get overwhelmed and then I'm going to lose to something. Zapdos can also do other things like, whichever HP you choose to use. Thunder Wave is good for slowing down offense, and that helps these guys who aren't the fastest thing in the world and things of that nature. And blowing up on certain teams, Celebi can mean that this guy run HP Grass in peace. As long as you have something for Flygon, maybe this guy has Ice Beam. Anyway, this has kind of been a convoluted rant, but I think this has illustrated somewhat accurately the kinds of teams that this set would anchor on. These kinds of mixed Magneton-less offenses. And the reason you would go Magneton-less is, yeah, Skarmory is nice, but I want all the resources I can get to handle the greater threats of the metagame, such as Gengar, and I can deal with Skarmory without Mag. So it's a difference in approach. So Snorlax is really crucial for them. Okay, so I think that is most of what I wanted to cover with Snorlax. Let's see, some niche options. I mean, Snorlax can run like Choice Band and stuff if you want to immediately Oko Skarmory with it or take a Cheetar with you. But remember, with Snorlax, it's very important that you are aware of what you're doing and are heads up with what you're trying to take out with it. So, like for example, if you got a cursed self-destruct Lax, you got to be careful because you're going to try to blow up that Scarm. It might protect, it might switch to Gengar, or you might just catch T-Tar instead. And I mean, catching T-Tar is never bad, but you're going to be like, you better be like, well, okay, that's nice, and that's going to make my Zapdos scarier, for example. As this Snorlax could easily be cursed self-destruct. Um, Snorlax's existence in ADV is a never-ending struggle against Scarm, Gengar, T-Tar. The triumvirate of passive damage and that is very common and easy to use. And of course, that might mean it's also very easy to abuse. But since all three of them are valid switch-ins, then you're going to have to be seriously aware of how you're going to tackle them. Defensively, try to pivot it in. Against a Zapdos staring down Salamence, maybe you go to Swampert, then you go to Snorlax to draw the HP Grass instead of switching into a full Brunt Thunderbolt. It's those little percentages that can make the difference in winning a game. In living that +2 DD Tar and blowing it up so you don't get swept. Things like that. Okay, I think that should be all for this. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them, but I think I made myself clear with how Snorlax functions within Advance, two main sets, its problems, but also its upsides. So thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed.